Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. On the show today, we are going to talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Malaysia over the weekend, which has given a fresh momentum to a relationship that's rooted in history but is now rapidly expanding into the future. So from semiconductors and digital payments to defense cooperation and Indo-Pacific strategy, India and Malaysia have mapped out an ambitious roadmap under their comprehensive strategic partnership. This visit delivered concrete outcomes across trade, technology, energy, education and also security, signaling that this partnership is moving into a more strategic and future-focused phase. What are the key takeaways from the two-day official visit of the Prime Minister to Malaysia will be our highlight. Also, how does this visit deepen India's outreach to Southeast Asia and the ASEAN? Also, could this partnership become a platform for collaboration in emerging areas like digital public infrastructure and the semiconductor value chain? To talk about some of these aspects and the significance of the Prime Minister's visit, we are joined by two distinguished guests. I'm pleased to welcome Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Sansad TV. Also pleased to welcome Mr. Pathikrit Pine. He's Senior Research Fellow, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. Mr. Pine, always a pleasure to have you join us on the program. Ambassador, to you first. So the Prime Minister's visit to Malaysia has been described as both productive and memorable by the Ministry of External Affairs. There have been some important agreements and announcements that have also taken place. To begin with, in your view, how significant has this visit of the Prime Minister been in the overall trajectory of India-Malaysia relations?
Well, I think it has been very significant and very important. Let me explain a little bit. You know, India-Malaysia relations have gone through their own shares of up and down. But I think under Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, both India and Malaysia are now united in their push to develop the relationship from one strength to another. You know, I think the special gestures that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim made for our Prime Minister, he went to the airport to receive him, they traveled in the same car. It was an indication that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is willing to give that special push to carry the India-Malaysia relationship to new heights, both in the bilateral context and in the ASEAN context. Malaysia has just completed its chairmanship of ASEAN, and our Prime Minister could not be there for the summit meeting last year when Malaysia was chairman, but he had assured Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim that he would go very soon, and this completion of his commitment was considered very highly within Malaysia, that we are showing a very serious interest. You know, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's decision to join our Prime Minister in addressing the Indian diaspora in Malaysia is a very special gesture. It has never been done before. The Malaysian leaders have not previously joined our prime ministers for these important occasions. But it shows that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim is willing to go that extra step, not only to reassure the Indian diaspora in Malaysia of his own commitment to their welfare and their continued economic growth and development, but also that he is willing to give these special gestures to India because he wants the India-Malaysia relationship to grow very strongly. The India-Malaysia relationship is one of great potential. It has tremendous potential, but it has not always fulfilled the potential. Trade can be much, much more, but I think the decision this time for both Indian and Malaysian leadership and the governments to move into very specific new areas, like semiconductors. We've got the UPI agreement between India and Malaysia, and we've got the one on education. We've got the whole impact concept, the India-Malaysia Partnership for Collective Transformation. Now, this is a very important acronym for the intention of the two leaders in how they intend to transform the relationship, and I think that it illustrates the new commitment, I would say a recommitment, because although this is Prime Minister's third visit to Malaysia since 2014, this is happening after a gap of about 5 or 6 years, 7 years almost. So I think it also shows that we are going to give special importance to the India-Malaysia relationship. And in the context of ASEAN, I think, and India's Act East policy, this India-Malaysia partnership can and will play an important role.
Certainly. I'll come back to you on the strategic dimensions of how our relationship has been progressing and what new announcements have been made in this regard. Let me bring Mr. Pine into the discussion as well. Mr. Pine, from the lens of diplomacy, given that the warmth and the respect that was accorded to our Prime Minister, it indicates that level of comfort that both New Delhi and Kuala Lumpur enjoy. But if I take you back in time and try and understand how this relationship has evolved over decades. Traditionally, we see that we have our bilateral ties rooted in history, but most importantly, driven largely by the diaspora links. Also in trade commodities, particularly the palm oil. That's what we've heard of when speaking about India-Malaysia relationship. But from a broader perspective, how would you explain to our viewers about this relationship having structurally evolved to newer areas, and especially this visit adding a new layer of a strategic dimension to that partnership?
Well, first of all, if you look at it from the prism of, say, Andaman and Nicobar Island, Malaysia is not that far from India as it generally seems from mainland India. Secondly, as you rightly mentioned, that the diaspora has played a very critical role in bringing these two countries together. And that's why Tamil is a very, very well-known, popular and loved language. It is one of the shared bonds between these two countries, as has been mentioned by Prime Minister Modi himself. So there is a Tiruvalluvar, center is also being opened up in one of the universities in Malaysia.
Right.
Look, let's put it this way. For many of the countries of Southeast Asia, they had traditionally over the last 30, 40 years, an overwhelming dependence on China for economic reasons and an overwhelming dependence on United States for strategic security reasons. And whenever they sided with one, the other side used to get angry. In contrast to that, India comes up with a far more neutral and a preferred destination with which neither of the countries are too uncomfortable. Because in case of India, when we deepen our economic cooperation with any particular country, we do not try to dictate the foreign policy of that country. And that's why I think there is a certain kind of comfort in many of the countries feel when it comes to deepening cooperation with India. Secondly, it is a reality that this relationship did have its own ups and downs. Traditionally, in the last few years, we have witnessed how Malaysia have sided with Pakistan when it comes to critical votings. But that is something which is there, and yet, countries like Malaysia do realize that on economic front, there is absolutely no comparison, especially after the India's trade deal with the United States and European Union, where India would now have access to the combined market of, which is almost like $50 to $60 trillion. Many countries, including the likes of Malaysia, do realize that the potential of India is far more profound than what the GDP numbers of today project. We are a $4 trillion economy, that's a given, but we are the only perhaps country among the major economies of the world which is still giving a 7% plus growth rate dynamics. And secondly, in the next 10 years, there is no country which would have doubling or tripling of the GDP as it would happen in case of India. So by 2035, in all likelihood, India is going to be a $10 trillion economy. So for a country like Malaysia, which has a $470 billion GDP, if they have to expand their GDP for their own country's welfare, they have no option but to increase their cooperation with a country like India, which is going to be a symbiotic relationship. It's not going to be a one-way, because on one hand, in areas of digital public infrastructure, in case of semiconductors, in areas of electric vehicle, in areas of renewable energy, in areas of electronic components manufacturing, in case of many other areas, when it comes to welfare and directed benefit being given to people with the use of application of technology, governance with technology. India has been over the last few years a major pioneer among the rapidly developing economies of the world. So in that way, India does come up as a very, very lucrative opportunity for countries like Malaysia, including the areas of defense. In fact, Malaysia has been very, very interested, especially after Philippines and Vietnam took the Akash air defense systems and the BrahMos missile. They have been extremely interested on some of the very critical weapon systems that India, now is willing to, in a position to sell, which are, in terms of quality, world class, but in terms of cost, they are very, very cost effective. So that is not something many other countries, offer. So in that way, you do realize, you do feel there's a pivotal shift which is happening when it comes to countries like Malaysia in terms of the foreign policy, binded by two things: the deep civilizational connect, and secondly, the economic compulsions for countries like Malaysia to deepen relation with India. Of course, it doesn't mean, I think India as a country, and Ambassador Ma'am I'm sure she would agree with me, India has been as a mature democracy. We do not expect that overnight Malaysia will give up or disown their relationship with Pakistan or say with China, and that has not been the aspect of India's foreign policy. The only thing that India focuses on is that we do not impinge on your foreign policy. The only thing we expect from you is that do not allow your land to be used for any kind of activities which is inimical to the Indian interests, and vice versa. And that is where I think India does give a space for comfort for gradually calibrating the relationship to the next level without pushing anything, without forcing anything. And if you look at the way India actually negotiated and concluded its trade agreements, whether it is with United Kingdom or European Union or United States, I think it is a vindication of India's measured, patient, nuanced foreign policy. It is not reactive. It takes decisions keeping long-term perspectives in mind, and it doesn't force anything to other countries. The manner in which Prime Minister Modi has led India to emerge from among the fragile 5 economies of the world in 2013 to be among the major 4 economies of the world, the manner in which India has come up as a country which has become the voice for the Global South, the manner in which the Prime Minister talks about the aspirations of Global South countries, talks about reforms in the multilateral institutions, is against the weaponization of things like dollar, which is a reserve and a trading currency, or weaponization of SWIFT. The way India has shown, the way India has extended the helping hand during the COVID situation, I think it's a series of incidents together, including the military actions of India during Operation Sindoor. It has made many countries sit back and take notice of the evolution of this country. Of course, civilization.
That's right. You've comprehensively explained to our viewers, Mr. Pine, about the unique approach that India adapts to when dealing with partner countries. We believe in development cooperation, and that is what helps other countries engage more extensively, even to newer strategic areas with us. And in this context, we've seen, Ambassador, how the push to Malaysia India Digital Council, payment linkages between NPCI and PayNet Malaysia, these have been key announcements. So while it's a reaffirmation that India is now exporting its digital public infrastructure model as a diplomatic tool to several of these countries, but the question to you is, from a diplomatic point of view, do you think this digital payments in India's DPI could become for India what energy pipelines are for some countries? So instruments of long-term strategic influence, these are doing their job very, very silently and discreetly.
Of course, definitely. I think such like these payment systems, the UPI, it's of great significance because it eases travel between India and Malaysia. You go there, you don't worry at all because the payment system is already looked after. And it's a great source of strength for the Malaysian Indian community, for them and their interest in interaction with India. So I think we have to continue our focus on these such like economic instruments of diplomacy, which are of great importance to the people of Malaysia, because they want very much to strengthen economically and progress in that field. But strategically, we know that Malaysia is bound, a little bit restrained, self-restrained, I would say, in terms of how they see their relationship with China on the one hand and with Pakistan on the other. So because of these two relationships, you do find a certain amount of restraints and constraint in the development of the India-Malaysia partnership. And I think visits like our Prime Minister's visit this time are very important in overcoming such restraints which Malaysia may have in mind. And we can only convince Malaysia if we can show to them that the projects that we have agreed upon, the joint statement, the program of impact collaboration in the next few years, will actually be implemented fast. This is important because this kind of evidence of benefit to the people of Malaysia, they are in a way, they are middle income country, but very prosperous, and they do value this prosperity. Their businessmen look to partnerships which will give them more prosperity. And that's why they look a lot to the USA and to China. But can we in India bring to these Malaysian companies the evidence and the proof that their partnership with India will actually serve them much better? Because today America is investing a great deal in India. American AI companies, American data center companies, they are coming to India to set up their partnership. So the semiconductor, the whole chips industry, computer chips industry, these are areas where India and Malaysia can create these valuable partnerships for each other and for the rest of the world. Malaysia is looking to strengthen its role, for example, in the computer chips industry, semiconductor industry. They already have a global share of 13%, which is significant, but a lot of this is assembly. So India and Malaysia can cooperate, beyond just assembly in creating new products, in doing, high-tech cooperation on this matter, and the mobility agreement, facilitating Indian executives to work there, Indian high-tech software engineers to work there without any difficulty. I know when I was there was some huge difficulties on this front, but I think we've moved a lot beyond that. So, it's the dynamism in the relationship will come directly in proportion to the implementation of the agreements.
In fact,
and
this visit has in many ways tried to upgrade the comprehensive strategic partnership that both sides elevated their relationship into. This was the first visit of the Prime Minister to Malaysia after that elevation in the ties happened. And in many ways, the push was to perhaps translate that partnership to tangible outcomes. And in that aspect, we see these newer mechanisms of engagement, Mr. Pine. So semiconductor is one area. Ambassador spoke about how Malaysia is positioning itself in the semiconductor value chain, but at the same time we are also at a time when we are trying to build our own ecosystem given the geopolitical need, but also the fact that it aligns with our Viksit Bharat vision. Do you see this as a natural strategic fit between India and Malaysia? And in the times to come, how will this engagement, especially in the semiconductor value chain, help complement our partnership?
Look, first and foremost, if you look at cities like Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, in the past, they used to be looked upon as European cities in Asia. Over the last 1.5 decades or 2 decades, what has happened is that most of Indian major cities, or probably that of China, have completely overtaken the advantage that many of these cities used to have. So today, for any major company to have a base in India has far more advantage than to have probably in many of the Southeast Asian countries, for one simple reason, that India provides and has the option for giving the industrial level scalability, which many of the countries may not have. Primarily because India has a huge market, domestic market. It has a huge base of industrial level, companies, both big companies and MSMEs. And third, it has a vast, limitless pool of qualified technical people. So in that way, I think the scalability factor becomes so very critical in these areas that, however much you might be developed, you actually want to cooperate with countries like India, because it gives you the option from chip designing or say designing of any other thing to manufacturing, to scale up the manufacturing to the India, for the world, and at the same time you have a ready-made market within the country. And thirdly, a very important part is the downstream application of the chips. For example, the chips are something which would be required, maybe number one, in assembly of aircrafts, to space technology, to your renewable energy, things, to your weapon systems, to electric vehicles, to you name it, anything. And therefore, in each of the sectors, you see the kind of industrial revolution, you may call it, the way India is bringing in through Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan and the production-linked incentive scheme. Some of the areas where India had a disadvantage in the past in terms of, because of which India never could in the past come up as a viable alternate major manufacturing hub. I think government of India in the last few years, in terms of taking care of the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code Act, or reforming the labor code, or bringing down corporate tax rate to 25%, to 15% for new companies, a lot of things have been happening, including that of infrastructure development, that today India gives that kind of scalability which many countries cannot afford to give, do not have the capacity. And that's the reason I think for a country like Malaysia, it becomes a viable alternate, even without doing away with their relationship with China. Two other things. Number one, India is the only country in the world which has very good relation both with the West and Russia and China. With China, we have a working relationship. Strategically, we have problems, but we do have a working relationship.
That's right.
And that is something which not many countries offer. So you can seamlessly in India cooperate and operate with American companies. And at the same time, just beside you can have a Chinese or the Russian company operating at the same time. So that is the dynamics that India's foreign policy, its approach has given, which is amazing and exceptional. Third, last but not the least, even while India has gone ahead and have concluded the trade deals with European Union and United States, this year, under the presidency of India, the BRICS summit that would happen would also showcase the potential possibility of the non-Western trade format, geopolitical format that is shaping up, which is so very critical in its own way. So for countries like Malaysia, in the times to come, it would be very difficult to ignore even BRICS. And therefore, while aligning with India, it gives you that cushion of having good relation with all sides without being threatened with anybody else. I have spent quite a bit of time in Singapore, and just across the sea, it used to be Malaysia. In most of the dialogues, I'm talking about a time of 15 years back, most of the dialogues in Southeast Asia, one issue that used to come up that time was how would India come up and when would India come up? I think the expectation from India in Southeast Asia is not something new. It is that those countries had expectation from India far more than perhaps India was expecting from itself. It's only in the last, say, 5-6 years we have seen a pivotal shift in terms of that aspirational push that India is giving to unleash its real potential, which is now giving results. And therefore, I think I am not much surprised by the kind of anticipation, the kind of expectation that you see from many countries, especially the countries of Southeast Asia, which in many ways have a civilizational, cultural connect with us. And my last point would be this, it is a developing country with a colonial past, so some of the fundamental challenges that we face in India, it's the same that Malaysia faces. We may be different in many ways, but there are areas of convergence as well. When it comes to counter-terrorism, when it comes to disaster management, disaster mitigation, it is a disaster-prone country, natural disaster-prone country like India. So when it comes to an organization like NDRF that India has put up with 16 battalions, which is almost 24/7 ready to deal with natural disasters, it is a template that they can, they are interested in. India is a country which have set up satellites in the space which can anticipate a cyclone a month before it happens. So the casualties during cyclones have come down to less than 10 every time it happens.
That's right. In fact,
20 years back,
the list of outcomes does include some of the MOUs on the cooperation in some of these areas that you spoke about, in disaster management, in combating and preventing corruption. Also, we see a memorandum of understanding on the UN peacekeeping force. So you've explained it quite comprehensively, but before I bring a question on BRICS and India's engagement with Malaysia on how it strengthens our Act East strategy, but also our Indo-Pacific strategy. One question to you, Ambassador, on the defense ties and how we've been able to elevate that also to a major extent, given the geopolitical scenario and the need for that kind of partnership. So the defense ties between India and Malaysia have clearly moved from just being of goodwill to now more structured, strategic kind of engagement that we are seeing. Even in the joint statement that was released following Prime Minister's visit, maritime cooperation was repeatedly emphasized. How crucial is Malaysia to India's maritime strategy, but also how do you see us deepening our defense partnership, which strengthens our Indo-Pacific strategy, our Act East strategy?
Defense has always been a very important part of India-Malaysia cooperation, but here again the potential has a lot more area to go than what has already been achieved. We are both members, very important, significant members of the Indo-Pacific family, of the Indo-Pacific region. And as such, in maritime security, we have a great deal that we can do together. The Malacca Straits are one of the most important sea lines of communication in the world. And, India and Malaysia can really work together a lot in this. India and Malaysia have had a discussion on this. There is an ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which we fully support. There is an Indian initiative on the Indo-Pacific, where some countries have joined, like Singapore and Indonesia, but Malaysia has not yet joined. I think Malaysia is still exercising a great deal of caution on these issues over its relationship with China, because the Chinese community in Malaysia is very powerful, very well off, doing very well. And I think that Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has a very good relationship with the Chinese community in Malaysia and, of course, with China itself. So he's always constrained by these factors. I think that nonetheless, we have been able to carry forward a lot of new dynamics in the defense partnership, which are outlined in the joint statement and in the discussions. And I really hope that with the focus on implementation, again and again, I'm talking of implementation because in the India-Malaysia partnership, in the past experience, it is this factor of implementation which has been one of the aspects which we need to now pay a lot of very close attention to. And there's one more aspect, for example, on implementation that I'd like to draw attention to, and this concerns the very large Indian diaspora in Malaysia, the second largest in the world, and of course it is of great importance to us. And I'm very glad that this time, under the rubric of education, we are even going into the issues of centers of Indian studies, the Tiruvallur decision about the chair and the scholarship. Those are very important. But I also think at the secondary education level, we need to do a lot more with the Malaysian Indian diaspora, because they do have a problem, since many of them, our Prime Minister spoke so well and so highly about the Tamil language and its importance in the relationship between India and Malaysia. I think based on that, carrying it forward, Tamil education at the secondary level, and from there coming into Tamil in English education, so that the Indian diaspora, as they take the benefits of education, can then play a much bigger role in the Malaysian economic growth and than they have been doing. So they have been doing a lot. It has developed a lot. The Prime Minister of Malaysia mentioned it, Prime Minister of India mentioned it. But to bring them even more dynamically, I'm comparing at all times the contribution through education of the Malaysian Indian diaspora and the Malaysian Chinese diaspora. And it's important that we get the Indian diaspora to catch up on this. This would be really one of the most important contributions strategically and economically, and in focusing on the relationship between India and Malaysia, if we could bring this aspect into it at a very, very high level of focus and implementation.
That's right. So from strengthening the diaspora connect that both India and Malaysia have, to digital innovation, to trade, also defense cooperation in the Indo-Pacific that we've spoken about, India and Malaysia are looking at each other as partners for future. So we're trying to build on and elevate our relationship from the past, which is rooted in history. But this visit clearly has opened a much more ambitious chapter in this long-standing partnership. With that, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of Perspective. Thank you, Ambassador and Mr. Pine, for joining us and sharing your insightful thoughts and views with us and our viewers. To you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.